Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Tangy Stitches Knitting Podcast. My name is Claire, and in today's episode I will be talking about my finished Lanark sweater. I have 3 whips to share, and I also am giving a little bit of a recap of when I went to the Valhalla Yarns farm a couple weekends ago and got to see all of the baby lamb and alpaca there. So sit back, relax, grab your knitting, and let's get started. Starting off this episode with what I am wearing my Cumulus tee by Petite Knit. I knit this in March as part of a Cumulus mini cal, and it is knit in Knitting for Olive Pure Silk, which is the recommended yarn in the color copper. And since I've knit this, I have worn this t-shirt probably at least once a week, and it's one of my most worn knits. I love the way that it fits, and it's just really easy to throw on and wear and very comfortable. I won't go into too many of the details about this, but I do talk about it as a finished object in my first episode, so you can check that out if you would like to. So now we can get started with finished objects this week, this podcast. And this is my finished Lanark sweater. This is the Lanark Sweater, or actually maybe it's called the Lanark Sweater. This is by Rebecca Clow, or the Karabella, and I'm pretty sure that I've heard her pronounce this, and it is Lanark. So this is the Lanark sweater, and it is a quarter zip, drop shoulder, all over half fisherman's rib sweater. It has this really plush collar and 1x1 rib on the bottom and at the sleeve. So a little bit more about the construction of this sweater. When you start knitting it, you knit this collar first, and the collar is double layered. So you knit basically the length of the collar doubled, fold it over, and then knit, well actually you don't fold it over immediately, but you then knit this back panel attached to the collar and knit it down to where the sleeves would start. And then after you finish the back panel, then you pick up stitches along the shoulder and work the front 2 panels. And one of the really cool things about this pattern is that there are some short rows that are worked right here through this front panel that makes it so this collar has this kind of nice slope downwards towards the middle there. And I think that little bit of shaping really looks quite nice, and this is kind of how it looks with the zipper open. But the detail here in the short rows is that they're done in pattern, so the rib from the collar down to this front panel is just so seamless, even with that bit of shaping. And I find that to be very nice. So after the front panels are worked down to the underarm as well, and that's also where this zip ends, then everything gets joined in the round, and you finish knitting the length of the body in the round with finishing with this 1x1 rib at the bottom. And after the body has been finished knitted, then you pick up stitches for the sleeves, which are then worked in the round as well. And there are some sleeve decreases, and let me show you what those decreases look like, because they are also in pattern, so it looks very nice. Let me see. So this is basically the underarm of the sleeve here, and you can see those decreases in this half fisherman's rib pattern. So I really enjoyed knitting this. I think the half fisherman's rib or half brioche stitch, this was the first time that I knit this stitch, and I found it to be very flowy. Like you could really get into a rhythm while knitting this. And I also just really enjoy the fabric that it creates, which is so plush and squishy and cozy. I just finished knitting this sweater a couple of days ago, and I've already worn it. Well, I guess I've worn it every day since then, and I just find it to be really cozy and nice. The yarn that I used for this is the Fibre Co Cumbria, and I used the colorway Nutkin, which is this beautiful rust burnt orange red color. And this yarn is a blend of Masha, Merino, and Mohair. So actually, I'll see if the camera can pick this up, but there is a bit of fluff on this sweater, and I think I'm assuming that that is kind of like the mohair content that's in it. I think this yarn is pretty soft, but I do find that I've worn it with a tank top and a t-shirt underneath, and with a tank top I do feel like it's a little bit kind of itchy around my shoulder area. Not unwearable, but just like a tiny bit itchy. But once I was wearing a t-shirt underneath, then I felt like it was completely fine. So I had no problem with this on my arms, and otherwise I think this is a great cozy yarn, and I really like the drape and the fabric that it created. So overall, I knit the size 3 in this sweater, which was supposed to come out to a chest circumference of 112 centimeters, and I just measured mine after blocking, and it is 110 centimeters. So basically exactly what the finished, very close to what the finished measurements should be, giving me about 20 centimeters of positive ease. I will include a photo or some video of me wearing this so you could see how it fits. But I really like the drop shoulder look of it, and how this kind of shoulder detail you can see on the edge when you're wearing it. I think it looks very nice. And the other thing is that I used, I think in the end I used 6 skeins of yarn. So these come in 100-gram hanks, and I used 6 of them, which was about 1,200 meters of yarn. In the pattern for size 3, it is recommended, or the yardage is estimated to be 1,500 meters, but I only used 1,200, and that's probably because I cropped the length a little bit. So I think in the pattern, you maybe have about 6 centimeters more that you were supposed to knit before going into the 1x1 rib, but I decided to crop mine a tiny bit, which I'm not sure exactly how I feel about it at this point, because I do think I kind of feel like I tug it down a little bit, and maybe it would have been better just to have knit the full length. But I am happy with the way that it turned out. Oh, I guess I'll also mention, I forgot, so after knitting everything, then you have to install the zipper. And this is the first time that I have worked a zipper into anything, so it was interesting to learn how that was done. But basically on the inside, there actually is this facing that is knit first. So this is 6 stitches wide, and you knit down from the collar along the inside, and it's sewn down right here on this edge so that there is a little hole or this gap in between like the two layers of the collar and between the facing and the front is where you slide in your zipper, and then you sew down the zipper through both layers of the knitting, and that is what keeps the zipper in place. And I got this zipper at my local sewing store, and it was actually, this is a perfect color match. But one thing is that this zip is very small, so I think the zipper pull is a little bit smaller than I would have liked. But they did not have this color in a different kind of zipper. So this is what I went with, and I do think it looks nice, and probably won't matter that the zipper pull is a little bit small. Yeah, so I guess I don't have much more to say about the wear yet. I've worn it just a couple of times because I just finished knitting it, but I do see myself wearing this quite a bit here. In San Francisco, the weather is very interesting. For those of you that don't know, summers in San Francisco can be very cold because of the marine layer and the fog that comes in. So summertime in San Francisco is definitely still sweater weather for the most part, and I think I'll get a lot of wear out of this, and I can report back about how well this yarn wears. All right, moving on to my first work in progress. This is something that I casted on after my first episode, so you have not seen any of this before, but this is the blank canvas tee by Minimi Knit Designs, and I am test knitting this t-shirt. So it is a circular yoke t-shirt that is knit from the top down, and it is in reverse stockinette stitch. So it's knit inside out. This is the stockinette side. And you knit it in the round, so it's mostly knit stitches. But on the reverse side, there is this slip stitch detail that runs down the front center. And this is the first circular yoke that I've knit, and I do find that it's kind of a fun construction technique. So having the increases spaced out along the circle, and it was fun to get that picture of this when the circular yoke was very circly. So the yarn that I used for this is Urth Yarns Monokrum cotton. So this is a 100% mercerized cotton in a DK weight, and it's actually a hand-dyed yarn. And why I chose a hand-dyed kind of beige white color, I'm not exactly sure, but this was a yarn that I picked up at my local yarn store, Imagine It, in San Francisco, and this was already in stash, so I decided to use that yarn for this test knit. This is the first time that I'm knitting something out of a 100% cotton yarn, so I'm not sure how it will turn out, but one thing that I did kind of notice about this is because it is this cotton yarn and it doesn't really have any kind of fluff to it, then the increases that you do for the yoke are very, very visible in this fabric. And it almost looks a little bit like a lace pattern, almost, but these are just the increases that are going around the yoke. The other thing about this hand-dyed yarn is that There is a little bit of color variation, so there is a little bit of almost striping that is occurring here, which I'm not sure if I like very much. One thing that I was considering with this is that after I finish knitting it, I might decide to dye it. So I think it could be a fun project to try to dye this in some way. Maybe do some sort of even tie-dye or dip dye. And if that doesn't turn out well, then just dyeing it completely solid in a dark color. And one of the reasons that I'm thinking about dyeing it in a darker color is so that this stitch pattern with the increases is a little less visible than with this white color. So this test knit, the due date is just in a week, so I have not that much time to finish it. I am a little bit behind, and I have knit almost the full length of the body. Actually, in the pattern, this would be the length that I need before I switch to the ribbing at the bottom, but it is very cropped right now. So I think I probably will extend the length a bit so that it's not so cropped. And then after I finish knitting the length of the body, there's some ribbing at the bottom, then I will put these sleeve stitches back onto my needles. And I actually think in the pattern, this goes almost immediately into the rib for the sleeve finishing. So it has this kind of cap sleeve design, though I think in the samples some of the sleeves look a bit longer, so I think my yoke length may be a little bit short, but I will block this and see how it turns out. I think this test knit went very well. The pattern is well written. I didn't really have any issues with the pattern. There are short rows that are worked after the circular yoke portion. So let me see. So you can kind of see the length difference between the front and the back. And the short row turns are kind of also pretty visible here. So there was a method that the designer wanted to be used in this pattern, and it is different, I think, than German short rows, which I had done in the Mia sweater and also maybe in the Lanark sweater, though I don't remember exactly how the turn went. But this turn was done slightly differently than what I've done in the past, and the result I think is a little bit less clean, but also I think this is a function of the yarn that you're using, and because this is the 100% cotton yarn, these holes are maybe more visible than they would be if this was knit in a wool. But by next week, this should be a finished object, and then from there, I guess I'll decide whether I want to dye it or not, and then I will have another little t-shirt. I have tried this on, and I do think it fits pretty well and will be a very cute little summer t-shirt. So this is the test knit for the blank canvas tee. Moving on to my second work in progress. This was a whip that I showed on my last episode, and this is the Braidy loop cardigan by Other Loops. And in the last episode, I had basically finished knitting the saddle shoulder, which is the width of the cable. So what I had last time was maybe between here, and since then I have added on this many rows all the way around. So this is going to be a cardigan, and this is kind of what that is looking like so far. These cables will run all the way down the length of the sleeve, and this will have a pretty steep V neck line before it goes down into the button band. So this is the work in progress that I have so far. The yarn that I used is Karabella Yarns Aurora 8. And this is a 100% merino, extra fine merino wool that is spun in this 8-ply spin that ends up with this kind of stitch pattern where the stitches don't look like little V's, and instead there's kind of more of a vertical line in that stitch. I think this yarn has kind of grown on me because I wasn't really sure that I liked the look of this. But now I do think it looks pretty neat actually with how defined each of the stitches kind of look. And I also like this color, which is I think it's called olive. There's not a name on the label, but this color number is 1410, and on Ravelry, when I just put it into my stash, it says 1410 olive. So this is that color. And I'm making pretty slow progress on this, but I am enjoying the knitting so far. So the pattern itself, I think, is written for probably advanced beginners or intermediate knitters. And the reason that I say that is because a lot of the pattern is written like knit the stitches as they are shown. So you really need to be able to read your own knitting, especially around the cables here, of whether you have knit stitches or purl stitches. And the other thing about the pattern is that this cable is basically worked every 10th row. And in the pattern, she does not specify what you do on every row, and instead just gives you the instructions of work the cable every 10 rows. And besides that, there's also a pattern for the increases around the shoulder, and that also gets repeated in the pattern. So it's kind of like there are 6 rows that are written with instructions, and then you repeat rows 1 through 6 a certain number of times, but within that there's not specific instructions for like how many stitches that you're knitting or purling, and instead you just read the knitting as you go. And I have not had too much problem following that. For the cables, I am basically marking or counting. Every time I finish a row, I will write kind of a row number into my notes so I know what row I'm on, and that way I know when I reach that 10th row, that will be when I do my cable, for example. So yeah, this is the Braidy loop cardigan by Other Loops. I'm hoping to make some good progress on this, and I'm looking forward to wearing it, so I definitely need to knit this faster. I am knitting on size 5mm needles. The recommended needle size for this was 4.5, so I did have to size up on this one to achieve gauge. And with this slightly larger needle size, I think the knitting goes by a little bit faster, but then there is kind of the counting rows aspect of it that makes it a little less mindless. Moving on to my third work in progress, this is my last whip. This is the Polar Teddy Jacket by Ann-kathrin. And this is just the start of the jacket. So far I have cast it on. This is the back neck, and this is the back panel. There are increases that are worked along the sides here, and it will have this kind of diagonal shape in the back. Then you pick up stitches for the front. You knit the front 2 panels, join in the round to knit the body, and then add sleeves. So this is a really cool pattern because it uses bouclé yarn, and it actually uses 2 strands of bouclé, and I am using 2 colors, a black and a brown color. So the yarn that I'm using is this Trendsetter Yarns T-Bear, and this is the black color, and this is the brown color. And the fabric that they make when they are knit together looks like this, and I think it looks really cool with this marling. In the sample photos for this pattern, she has knit also with 2 different colors of bouclé yarn. Hers is a light cream color and a darker cream color, and I thought that the marling effect looked really cool, so I also wanted to use 2 colors, and this is the fabric so far. Yeah, I'm really excited to be knitting this. I think this is something that I definitely will enjoy wearing, especially in San Francisco, where it does get pretty cool in the evenings, even in the summertime. So this will get a lot of use, I think, and it's also just really soft and fluffy, will be probably very cozy and warm. This yarn is a mix of alpaca and wool, so it's 75% alpaca, 10% wool, and 15% polyamide. And actually I found that this, I really like the way that this yarn smells. It has like kind of, you know, a fiber fleece kind of scent to it, and I actually like that quite a bit. One thing about knitting this is that it is very hard to see stitches. I think it's pretty much impossible to count rows. And doing the increases, at first I found them to be like very difficult because I could not see at all the bar in between the stitches. So when I'm doing the increases, I really don't know where I am creating that extra loop. I think now I've gotten to the point where I feel like I am picking up the correct bar in between the stitches. But when I was starting out, it was very hard to see what I'm doing. And in the pattern, the designer does have you leave in stitch markers in certain places so that it'll be easier to find those stitches when you need to come back to them. And that's probably a good thing to do because otherwise I think it would be very hard to know where these stitches are. Like here, for example, is where the increases end. And if you were just looking at this, it would be very hard to see like what row that ending happened on. Besides the increases, I haven't had too much trouble knitting with the bouclé. I do have to be careful about catching the loops on the needles, but I think the knitting has been going pretty well. And I am using size 6.5 millimeter needles, which is, I think I had to size down. So the pattern recommends 7 millimeter needles, but she does have a note that she is a very tight knitter, so you might have to size down to achieve gauge. And so I did have to size down to achieve gauge. But I really like the fabric that it's producing, and I'm looking forward to having more of this knit up so I can wear it. Finally, the last thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit was my experience going to the Valhalla Yarns farm / ranch that I went to a couple of weekends ago as part of a field trip with one of the local Bay Area yarn shops, Fibre Arts. So this was a trip that they advertised through their mailing list to visit the farm that has all of the animals that supply the fiber for Valhalla Yarns, which is a local yarn company here in the Bay Area. And when I saw this email, I actually saw this email first come from Uncommon Threads, which is another yarn store in the Bay Area. I think that one is in Los Altos. I saw that email come in, and I did not sign up right away. And the next day, I think it had already sold out. And I was very disappointed that I had not signed up fast enough. But maybe like about a week later, I got another email from Fibre Arts, and they were also taking a field trip to Valhalla Yarns on Saturday instead of Sunday for this weekend. And I signed up right away. So I got 2 tickets for me and my sister, and we went on this field trip. So the farm itself is, I guess it's a ranch, maybe also a farm. They have animals and do sustainable agriculture. So I guess it would count as both a farm and a ranch. The ranch is actually named Pomponio Ranch. And that ranch has existed as a ranch in the Bay Area for over 100 years, maybe. But the current owner, Signe, and her husband, I think purchased this land in 2010. So they have been there for almost 15 years now. The ranch is located on the west side of the Santa Cruz Mountains. So it's kind of coastal on the Bay Peninsula. It is close to the town of San Gregorio, in between San Gregorio and Pescadero, which are little towns that are on the coast that I actually have done some cycling to. So it was fun to kind of drive on those roads again and recognize like the San Gregorio General Store, which is where we would stop for snacks on our bike rides. The ranch itself is kind of at the end of this long winding road. There's no reception at all. And we went there on Saturday morning a couple of weekends ago. And when we got there, we basically heard from the owner, Signe, who talked about the land and owning the farm and ranch and their sustainable agriculture practices. So I think one thing that is kind of interesting about this area is that there are a lot of wildfires in California and a lot of risk of fire. And one of the things that they have to think about a lot is how they manage the land so that they lower the risk of fire damage. And so they were talking about having goats to clear brush as one way to manage fire. They also do some controlled burns, so they will burn off some of the brush and use tractors as well to clear brush from the flatter areas. I think at this farm they raise cattle and also raise horses, and then have the sheep and alpaca. And the sheep and alpaca are the animals that are the source of fiber for Valhalla Yarns. And so we went, to the farm, and we were able to see the animals in their pens, and it was lambing season. So I think they were saying that if you raise lambs for meat, then actually lambing season is earlier in the year, but because their sheep are only raised for their fiber, then their lambing season can be later in the year. So we were right there in the middle of lambing season, and they had just a dozen of baby lambs. Some of them were just a few days old, so they were very cute. The lambs actually were very friendly and would kind of come up to you when you would walk into the pens, and the mama sheeps would kind of hide in the back, I would say. So one cool thing is that they have alpaca also. I'm not sure if I've ever seen alpaca before in the flesh, but this is maybe the first time that I've seen alpaca. And they did have one baby alpaca that is a yearling, so maybe less than a year old. And we were able to go into the pens with these alpaca to touch their fleece. The alpaca were very skittish, so they did not really like you being in the pens. So I kind of went in, quickly tried to touch the fleece of the alpaca and then made my way out of there. But they're so cute. They're such interesting animals. And there's, I guess, very interesting things about their fiber and the way that they graze. So on this farm, I think they originally brought in alpaca as a way to graze the land and improve the soil through their agriculture practices. But then the owner decided to start this yarn company and source the fiber from the alpaca and the sheep. So the sheep that she raises are, I think, mainly Cormo sheep. This is one, I guess, species of sheep. And there also, I think, were some Merino, but I think they're primarily Cormo. At the end of this outing, we did get a little gift bag, and in that gift bag, we got a little hank of yarn. This is Valhalla Yarns, named Valhalla Yarns because the fibers here are heavenly soft. And this yarn is 80% Cormo, 20% alpaca, and is a 3-ply sport weight yarn in this natural granite color. So I'm not sure what I'm gonna use this yarn for quite yet, but it does feel quite nice. Yeah, so I was there on the trip for maybe an hour and a half, but actually had to leave early. So I think I missed a lot of the talk about the actual fleece to fiber process, which is very sad that I was not there for that. But I think it is really cool that they basically will shear the sheep and send the fleece to the sheep and the alpaca and send the fleece to local cottage mills, maybe on the West Coast in Washington State or in Idaho, and then it is spun into yarn at those mills and then brought back to the Bay Area. And I think they actually are carried by a few of our local Bay Area yarn stores. And you can also find it online at valhallayarns.com. Yeah, so Signe talks a lot about the fiber content of these yarns. So she is very into the animal husbandry that is involved in breeding the best sheep and alpaca for fiber production. And I think the fiber of an animal is based on its genetics primarily, and also the food that it eats. So something that was kind of interesting is that when these animals eat a rich diet, that actually makes their fiber more weak. So in order to grow really strong fiber, you actually need to feed them a diet that is not very rich. So it would be, I guess, mostly kind of a grass-based diet. So it was very cool to see the animals and to pet the lambs, and it was a very fun trip. I am definitely sad that I did not get to hear more about the process of spinning and how the yarn is made, but maybe that just means that I need to go back and go on a second field trip there. So I think that is everything for this episode. I do not have any new yarn acquisitions, and I do have some future projects that are planned, but I think I will save talking about them for next time. So thank you so much for joining me for this episode. Hope you enjoyed your time here, and I will see you next time.